Hello and welcome to the webinar, Strategies for Data Monetization in Private Equity. I'm Tom Stewart, a director of AlixPartners. I will be your moderator, or perhaps your immoderator, during today's discussion. We've got three terrific panelists who I'll introduce in a second, but let me begin with a couple of rules of the road and a little introduction to the topic. First of all, we will be open for questions during and after the webinar. You will have the opportunity to ask questions, which we will take up and pick up as best we can afterwards. Second of all, there will be a link to the recording that will be sent to all of you or posted on LinkedIn shortly after the recording. So if you want to go back and read, mark, and inwardly digest and memorize all the wisdom you're about to hear, you'll be able to go there and get that as well. The topic of the webinar, the title of this webinar is, as I said, Strategies for Data Monetization in Private Equity. And I want to pick out those three key words. First of all, we're going to be trying to talk at a strategic level, things that actually move the needle for companies and help them get competitive advantage. Second of all, we're going to be talking about data and data monetization and focusing on the opportunities in the enormous and rather complex private equity business, where because of the nature of the relationship between private equity firms and their portfolio companies, there are some unique dynamics to data monetization. Nobody needs to tell us that we're in an information age. We're in a data age. Companies live, breathe, and throw off an extraordinary amount of data. Data from finance, data from transactions, data from suppliers, data from smart machines on factory floors, and of course, tons and tons of sales and customer data. You need those data to run the company. But what we want to talk about today is the opportunity that those data provide, not just to run the company and run the company better, but to create extraordinary revenue opportunities for companies and for portfolio companies and for private equity firms. As I said, the opportunity in private equity firm is unique and different and perhaps greater than that for others, partly because of the speed and pressure in private equity to drive and create enterprise value, the unique situation where value can be found and created both at the firm level and at the level of the portfolio company, and also across portcos. And finally, because of the accelerating adoption of artificial intelligence, and particularly generative AI, across the private equity industry. We've got three experts here to talk about it, and let me introduce them, and then we'll get going, and you can hear less of me and more from them. The first is Barb Wixom. Barb is a principal research scientist at the Center for Information Systems Research, called CISR, at MIT, and is the co-author of Data is Everyone's Business, a terrific book which I commend to all of you. Jason McDonald is AlixPartners America's lead of private equity and of the private equity and investors practice. And Hoyoung Park, also at AlixPartners, is a partner and managing director and global co-leader of the the AI and data practice. He, before coming to AlixPartners, was the COO of a PE-sponsored firm that implemented AI. So he's seen this both coming and going. Let me begin by I want to talk about three areas here, and I want to begin by just talking about data and the data explosion. And Barb, let me turn the microphone over to you, since you see this from your standpoint at MIT. You've written a book about it. We talk about the data explosion. I've heard somebody years ago talk about it as info glut. What are we seeing, and and how does this opportunity look like?
Well, it's a big opportunity. In fact, Tom, what we're finding is that top performing organizations, and that's whether you're looking at profitability, margins, growth, innovation, speed to market, across all of those different dimensions, top performing organizations attribute 10% more of overall firm revenues to data monetization. And so what that means is that more organizations are relying on data and creating and realizing value from it as a source of firm financial health. Now, what we see in those top performing firms is that they're not getting overwhelmed by all of the data you just speak about, this info glut. It's not really about data. It's about data assets. And that's finding the data in the organization and purposely preparing it for not just future use, but limitless use and often a range of uses that will emerge over time. And so that's what a lot of our research looks into, is how do we create those data assets? How do we figure out which ones we want to invest in and such? And that's the road to success today.
I want to pick out a little bit there. You talked about data monetization, and as you were talking about that, I made a distinction in my mind between data utilization and data monetization, and it looks like that's like a phase change from going from I'm using all this stuff to, oh, actually, I can make money with it.
Well, when it comes to data, I think it's important to remember a very simple process. And that's, you start with the data, you move and derive insight, you act, and that's the use part. Then you create value, which can be innumerable benefits, both intangible, tangible. But finally, you have to realize the value. That whole process, when you make sure you go from data all the way to value realization, that's what data monetization is all about. And that's really what we want to be focusing on, to make sure that we're using our data in financially productive ways.
And you talk about in the book 3 ways of using it. One is efficiency, cost, managing cost. Second is customer, and the third is creating a data business. And I think we'll talk about those 3 platforms, or those 3 forms of data monetization as we go forward. Jason, why don't you pick up the ball here and talk a little bit about how you see private equity industries and private equity firms and their portcos dealing with what we're dealing with, this data explosion and this opportunity.
Oh, indeed. It's very interesting, Tom. Thank you. And, it's interesting that PE firms, above all, have really been the most aggressive when it comes to adopting the latest digital and data-driven solutions. And, we work with over 300 private equity firms worldwide. And really in every conversation we've had about their portcos, it really involves exploration of digital solutions, data solutions, getting more advanced into machine learning and AI to translate data into useful information, and really to enable the right decisions ultimately. And they're most interested in top line opportunities and accelerated execution. And really this is due to the fact that PE firms really are used to an accelerated pace. They're focusing on maximizing returns as quickly as they can. And they're highly motivated to gain any edge that they can, so they're often willing to encourage leadership in the portcos to invest. And in that sense, kind of reminds me, Tom, in a way, you sort of see 2 different threads of monetizing and really exploring value from data within the PE context. The first would be within the PE firm itself, and the second would be really applying it to portcos. And, within PEs, it's interesting because they are looking at ways to optimize market trend analysis, compressing the timeline to evaluate potential investments when they think about due diligence, looking at comps. AI is quite good at really sort of giving you that view of comps across the industry, enhancing their decision-making processes, and ultimately just getting tactical visibility into operational data within the portcos. But within the portcos themselves, private equity firms are really encouraging leadership to embrace some of the new ways of monetizing data and really optimizing the value of that data. And so, for sort of a crawl, walk, run strategy, from a crawl point of view, initially, just getting immediate visibility, right? Understanding where the opportunities are, where we can enhance effectiveness. But ultimately, really, the end game is to enhance growth. And this gets into ways of enhancing sales effectiveness, net retention revenue, customer renewal rates, optimizing product and service portfolio margin performance. And ultimately, getting into efficiency and driving EBITDA impact, EBITDA multiple expansion. And so, just to kind of round that out, PE firms are doubly interested in looking at ways to optimize data, translating it into information, and then really driving the right kinds of decisions from there.
Hoyan, pick that up. You've been actually working with artificial intelligence in particular with both PE firms and some of their portcos. And how are you seeing them, again, understanding and viewing this opportunity landscape?
Yeah, Tom, you bring up a really good point around data explosion. And it's easy for companies to get overwhelmed, right? When you think about all the big data with IoT sensor data, computer vision type data, social media data, on top of all of the structured data. So what we found leading companies do is be use case driven, right? So select high impact use cases, and based on that, ask the question, what data do you need to solve that particular use case? So
let me interrupt you for a second, and for a layman, define what you mean by a use case.
So think about use case as like initiatives, right? So initiatives can be, for example, increasing customer lifetime value, or reducing churn, or using machine learning to optimize pricing. So to give you an example, let's just say that you want to reduce churn, right? Customer churn. Mm-hmm. So ask the question, what data do I need? And it turns out that it's actually not a massive data set to get started, right? So you need things like customer transaction data, which many companies have, product master, customer master. So it's really those three elements that if you have, you could make really good progress. Now, you want to supplement it with additional data, like, for example, behavioral data when customers are online, for example, or demographics, psychographic, geographic type data. But just starting with a core gives you a really good head start, and oftentimes actually is the best way to go so that you understand how the model works before you throw everything in the kitchen sink at it.
And talk to me a little bit more about picking a use case here, picking a situation. You mentioned a number of opportunities. Mm. I'm a private equity operating partner, and I've got 8 portfolio companies whom I'm overseeing. And we come together for an offsite, and we're talking about the opportunities in data monetization and artificial intelligence, and we all come with 3 ideas. How do you help me sort those through?
Yeah, first and foremost, use cases have to be linked to corporate strategy. So, for example, if your corporate strategy is to be the low-cost leader, then most of your AI initiatives should be kind of pointed there. Maybe not all, but most. On the flip side, if your corporate strategy is to be differentiated through customization, personalization, then most of your AI initiatives should be focused there. So my recommendation is start with corporate strategy first, and then determine where you could apply AI to improve use case or initiatives.
It also strikes me, just going at that and thinking about, again, a diversity of organizations, and across portfolio companies or within a portfolio company, you're going to have a group of C-suite executives, and your head of sales loves this stuff, and your head of marketing doesn't love it at all. So, I mean, it also strikes to me, and Barb, maybe you could pick up on this, that there could be an issue of you want to find the doors that lead to competitive advantage, but you also want to push on the doors that are open.
Yeah, I was actually hoping you would call on me, Tom. There are 2 points I think would be really helpful. First, when you look at data monetization in the research, we do find 4 archetypes of monetization portfolios, if you will. So one is the idea of using data monetization initiatives that we learned about for operational optimization. And so that's a very popular approach, especially for organizations just starting out in data monetization. And that's where you're really focused on using data and AI in order to make work better, cheaper, faster. The second is customer focus. And these are for organizations that are very interested in improving the customer experience and adding to the value proposition of their products. Maybe these are companies that are very concerned about commoditization of their offerings. And so customer focus is when you are doing both work improvements as well as you are wrapping data analytics around your experiences and your products in order to add value specifically through data analytics. So an example of this would be if you offer a banking service and you find ways to use data analytics as features to report back to consumer bank or consumer clients of what they're spending their money on, how well they're saving for their savings goals, that types of things.
And doing that in a more sophisticated way than my annual summary from Visa.
But actually, in a more tailored way, a more actionable way. Right. You have a lot more that you can offer clients, especially when you're leveraging AI types of techniques. The third approach is to take an information business approach. And this is when you really want to get into informational solutions, to deliver to the marketplace. And then finally, an archetype is what we call future ready. And these are organizations that are changing work, changing product, creating new revenue streams, kind of using data monetization in all ways possible. That, of course, requires a little bit more sophistication and capabilities when it comes to monetization. So those are the 4 archetypes of how initiatives shake out. And so going back to Hoying, what he was saying is we want to be consistent with our strategic intent and or our business model.
Right.
That's also the second point I wanted to make, is that's also how we're seeing organizations make their data asset investments, is they look across the firm and either they say, what's our strategic intent? So for instance, at BNP Paribas, their strategic intent is to use ESG more in investment decisions and more in their customer interactions. And so consistent with that, they invested in an ESG scoring data asset in order to help enable that. The other option is to really look for opportunities of broad relevance across the organization. So a convenience store chain, OXXO, they realized that if they could invest in a data asset that would calculate dead net profit, then that ability to have SKU level profitability would help across the organization. It would help store operations set hours. It would help advertising organizations and units create advertising strategies that were more effective. It would help supply chain negotiate with vendors. And so strategic intent, broad relevance are a helpful way when you're going from the data asset angle as opposed to initiatives.
So what I heard you say, and tell me if I get it wrong. All right, we start with some sort of strategic approach. I mean, we have some important corporate initiative. That helps us think about, Hoying, some of the use cases, some of the things that we can do. And in order to do those most successfully, we want to create some foundational data assets, some that might be specific to a kind of use case, customer information data assets, or some that might be enterprise-wide that we can all draw on. So we want to think about the data assets and the use in connection with strategy. And Jason, let me throw this at you. I guess I got it right because I got nods, right? Let me throw this at you. If you think about the private equity value chain, and you think about things from raising money to finding targets to acquire, to then making bids and doing due diligence and onboarding and then operations and so on and so forth. Let's talk. I mean, if we think about some of these points that Barb was just making and Hoying was just making, let's talk about maybe the first part of that, some of the due diligence things and the way you mentioned it earlier, the way private equity firms are using data assets and particularly artificial intelligence in that critical area, because, you can't put lipstick on a pig, and it's really important to be buying the right assets.
No, it's I was hoping I'd get caught on next because this is a great topic. You're seeing, as of now, PE firms are thinking quite tactically about where they can really optimize the value derived from data. So and I like Barbara's delineation of the archetypes, because on the one hand, you have companies that really have opportunities to optimize their operations and drive up EBITDA performance. That's something that's achievable within a year or 2 years in a sort of a transformation roadmap with investment backers. But then more strategically, you may have a PE firm looking at a more robust approach, which is maybe a data roll-up or a platform play, where they're acquiring a company and tacking on and rolling in companies to further monetize the data or utilize those capabilities in the original company with a target. So I'll give you an example. We worked with a $2 billion Silicon Valley-based technology company that we had helped migrate to a SaaS model, and they had really robust and mature telemetry data on customer usage of their software. In other words, what the customers were doing, how much they were using, what they weren't using. And so they were able to transform that into a way to optimize cross-sell, upsell, renewal sales, net retention revenue, customer lifetime value, key metrics of driving growth within your existing customer base, which can be very effective, especially in a sort of a disruptive, dynamic environment that we're in now. A lot of these companies, they are going to their current customer base. And so the PE firm in question then, as we worked with this portfolio company, considered and eventually executed an acquisition of a competitor And then we assisted in the integration of that and further monetization, bringing all that data to bear from the new acquisition into the operation, and further, really not just getting the immediate bang for the buck, but really optimizing the EBITDA multiple itself. And so that's a more advanced example of where you're seeing a PE firm utilize data in a very strategic way to optimize returns on those investments.
So, I mean, I know you look like 23 years old, Jason, but you've been around long enough. If you want to compare and contrast the due diligence process 10 years ago to now, and what automation, what technology, machine learning, and AI are doing to it in terms of speed, cost, sophistication, the value that can be added in the due diligence process. I mean, is this process about to be just improved or transformed?
Really interesting question, because on the one hand, yes, the due diligence process itself, through the use of AI in the right hands, and I'm going to come back to that point, absolutely accelerates insights. So when you're faced with a robust virtual data room and you've got thousands of documents to comb through, absolutely machine learning and AI, natural language programming, all of that NLP can come together and accelerate the insights very quickly. And we can enhance insights. I would say the next step of maturity would be enhancing our ability to really find those opportunities on behalf of a private equity firm. Let's say you're looking at a target company and you're not sure if there's upside potential on growth, or maybe there are optimization opportunities on efficiency. Well, machine learning and AI has helped us in our due diligence process really enhance those findings. And ultimately, what we're striving to get to is a prescriptive approach on AI. In other words, the tool itself is providing recommendations and saying, well, I found these as potential opportunities. That goes beyond just identifying irregularities or red flags or risks or opportunities, but really providing potential levers to optimize. That's a work in progress. And as I mentioned at the top of this answer, you have to be cautious, because AI, yes, DDs are getting better, but they have to be in the right hands. And what I mean by that is AI is only as good as the trainers. You've got to have what I would call expert-enabled AI. You don't want to have it as a crutch for a team of junior people who really don't understand some of the findings or maybe the operational implications of the opportunities. Not all opportunities are created equal. Some are more tactical and achievable. Some may not be that achievable. And so you really need to balance this incredible tool that provides amazing insights on a fast timeline with real experts who can interpret it and actually put it to use. And for the PE firm, realize value, tangible impact to EBITDA, or tangible impact to top line growth. So that's I think the secret sauce here of utilizing AI in combination with real expertise, and you'll get a really transformed approach to due diligence at that point.
And I see sort of three elements there. One is the red flags piece, the identification of risks and making sure that's good. Second is the optimization opportunity, and third might be the revenue and the commercial opportunity, all of which can be in the right hands. Hoyoung, you've then take this down, another step on the value chain, and I bought the company. It's now in my portfolio, and I have Barb talked about operations optimization and customer focus. Pick the customer focus one. I mean, tell me what you've seen with that.
Yeah, there's been numerous applications of machine learning as well as generative AI for customer-focused areas, including ML-based pricing, for example, customer lifetime value. The one particularly interesting one is the combination of both machine learning plus generative AI used together. And you don't see this often, but when you do, I think it can be quite powerful. And I could walk you through a particular example. This is with a retailer, but it could be applied in the technology, media, telecom sector, restaurant hospitality. So in this particular situation, we used a combination of machine learning, and I'll share with you what that is, and then again, generative AI. So we use machine learning to understand customer lifetime value of all million customers.
A million customers, yeah.
A million customers. So we understood the customer lifetime value, again, using machine learning, because you're making predictions on what the future lifetime value will be. And then we leveraged propensity to buy models to predict which of those million have the propensity to buy more items, because not all of your customers will. And so we found that about 100,000 or 10% have the propensity to buy more, right? And that was really important because as you think about...
Stop for just a second. We started with a haystack of 1 million. We're already down. We already got rid of 90% of the haystack, right? But it's also amazing that we were talking earlier, companies are drowning in data, but we are now boiling that down, to change metaphors. And we're using machine learning to focus on these people with a greater likelihood of buying. And
that's right.
something that 50 people with green eye shades would have taken a year to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's to change metaphors again, it's like we're teaching where to fish. Because if you go ahead and spend your marketing dollars across the board, you're wasting marketing dollars. So if you understand where to fish, meaning those who have the propensity to buy, you're using your marketing dollars much more wisely. And then, but that's not all of it, right? It's understanding then the segmentation, right? Using clustering, ML-based clustering, to understand the segments of those customers, because not all 100,000 of those customers are the same, right? So some are interested in some set of categories more than others. Some are promo sensitive, some are not. So really understanding them in more detail. And then using a recommender engine, it's kind of like Netflix, to determine what product they are likely to buy, right? So it could be very targeted. And then those are all machine learning efforts. And then you apply generative AI, right? And this is where it gets really interesting in that you feed it all the information from the ML model. So you really understand the customer, right? And then generative AI was used to create email content. You could use it for any type of marketing content, but in this particular case, it was email content. So subject lines, headers. And what we did there was created 10 microsegments because a client had capacity to review 10 email subject lines and headers. And as we all know, it still hallucinates, right? Gen AI still hallucinates. So we wanted a human in the loop, a marketing expert in the loop. And for each of those microsegments, we created 5 different subject lines and headers so that we could do A/B testing. And so essentially there's 50 different combinations. And this would have been impossible for the client to do without generative AI. But with the capabilities of generative AI, they were able to very quickly, in a matter of just a few days, do a couple of iterations, approve it, and get the email sent out. And the really important piece to all of this is, of course, impact. And what we found is that the difference between the lowest performing and highest performing email open rates, click-through rates, was in the order of 30%, right? So the goal here then is to now take it to the next level through something called reinforcement learning, where you continually learn from high-performing email subject line headers and so on, and create more content like that, right? So you go from a 2% open rate to a 2.3% open rate, and you keep improving through this reinforcement learning concept. So I thought that was one of the unique concepts in terms of working with a client to really drive up customer revenue.
And what I think is interesting is if we start, and Barb, pick this up, we start with this like lake of data that everybody has. We've got 1 million customers. We have all kinds of things. And we are then starting to create a data assets in service of a use case that turn this into open rates and presumably open checkbooks. I mean, Barb.
Well, actually, I want to
clarify. What did you
clarify a bit about this. So that's an excellent example of how organizations can really benefit and realize value. That's a great data monetization example, but it's actually one of improving. Because if you think about the organization has customer lifetime value processes, customer outreach processes, this is an excellent example of how we've now changed work. We've changed that process now to incorporate AI, Gen AI, in order to more effectively fuel that business process. The reason I want to point that out as an improvement is 51% of returns on average come from those. Wow. Organizations, a lot of time, they dismiss operational efficiencies and changes to work. But again, on average, 51% of our financial returns come in this way. So it's critical for us to really appreciate that and incorporate that into our calculations. Now, the way in which that would be customer focus in our definition, and when that would become what I call data wrappings, where you're adding to the value, is if now that we know these segments, maybe we know what additional features would appeal to those segments, and maybe they're different ones, and we're actually adding analytics features to our product. And let me give you a quick example. PepsiCo created data wrapping or wrap for their soda. And you're like, well, how can you create a analytics feature for soda? Well, what they did is they created, using AI, an optimized shopping experience for consumers who were setting up for a party. So imagine you want to have a party and you're not sure how many beverages, what beverages to buy, and there's a lot of different parameters.
How many Fritos, how many Doritos, and how many veggie trays,
well,
right?
that's what's so interesting about it, is from a PepsiCo perspective, one of the reasons for this was not only to help the customer optimize, but they were very interested in showcasing the fact that PepsiCo also owns Frito-Lay and has products that are snack in addition. So from a customer perspective, however, this was a feature that, because as a consumer, I can now have an optimized shopping list to help me better purchase, I'm going to save costs as a consumer on my shopping, adventure.
Sure.
But from a PepsiCo perspective, the value they realize is an expanded market share or expanded market basket share, because not only now will they hopefully sell their beverages, but also their products. But although they're making benefit, the reason it's a wrap, the reason it's adding to the value proposition, is the first and foremost, we're trying to help that consumer either make or save money. So anyway, that's
right.
It's
and so
a
we're
fine
moving.
line.
I hate to say it, but we're kind of moving to the solutions business, right? I mean, from Pepsi-Cola as a liquid, which is a solution, to PepsiCo as a solution to your Super Bowl party planning needs, right?
I wouldn't hate to say it. I think it's wonderful. I mean, at the end of the day, as organizations, how lovely to have data analytics enablement to help our consumers solve problems, really important ones. I think it's exactly how we should be using our data and AI, and again, benefiting financially from doing that.
So Jason, talk to me. What we've got PepsiCo here, which has two divisions, right? I mean, it has more than that, I guess, but we've got the snack foods and we've got the beverages, and but in a private equity situation, we're going to have the private equity firm, and we're going to have a bunch of portfolio companies which may not have synergies the way Doritos and Pepsi might have, and which also in many cases are going to be I don't want to say subscale, but they might be mid-sized companies. So there might be a bunch of portfolio companies that are all $100 million, $200 million companies. How, if you think about the architecture or the governance of these sort of data monetization and AI efforts across private equity, some of these guys say every tub on its own bottom. Hey, Portco, you're on your own. Just go do it. And some of these people are maybe thinking about about the ways in which the firm can add value to the collection. How have you seen that play out, and how should it play out?
Yeah, it's really comes down to about two different ways of applying this. One is tactically within the respective portcos, and secondly, to your point, is driving customer value capture. How do you optimize the value that you're really getting from your customers? And you can do that across portcos. For example, so in PepsiCo's case, they're really optimizing cross-sell opportunities and optimizing that customer value capture. In this case, within a PE context with multiple portcos in question, you'll have an opportunity to explore optimizing cross-portco sales effectiveness. I'll give you an example. We worked with a large telco, about a $6 billion operation, to drive up their enterprise sales capabilities by about $100 million in the first year alone by implementing an AI tool that gave them full visibility into sales engagement, key accounts that were neglected, things that weren't happening. How were they really driving month to month, quarter to quarter real results? Now, imagine applying that same AI tool across portcos in a similar industry vertical where you could enhance the synergies between them. You may be going after the same types of customers in the same verticals. Conversely, you may be going after the same suppliers. You may have optimization opportunities to have better leverage in negotiating across portcos within the context of that PE owner using AI to optimize the views into the supply chain and supplier base. Everything from your top 10 suppliers to that long tail of many, many, many suppliers that could use rationalization. The same thing applies to SKU rationalization and product portfolio optimization. Within that portco, absolutely. Machine learning, AI, the key here is to use it as a tool to enable proactive decision-making, or at the very least, rapid decision-making that enhances competitive advantage within the context of that company. So what products do we pursue? Which ones are most profitable? What portfolio do we have? But imagine across the portcos with a PE firm utilizing that for relevant portcos within, say, a similar industry. Imagine the synergies from cross-portco product partnerships and marketing. So absolutely, yes, it's possible. We've seen it done. But certainly, it really, when you're doing a cross-portco type of analyses and implementation, the level of complexity goes up, I think, exponentially in terms of collaboration, cooperation, sharing of data, et cetera. But it's absolutely feasible.
I also wonder whether there's a question of who's going to bear the burden of that investment. I mean, since PE firms want to stay, culturally, they want to stay lean and have, the lowest possible overhead. If they're going to be, creating data assets and creating these capabilities across a group of portfolio companies, who, by the way, I might only own for 7 years too. I mean, there may be some really interesting, challenges there. And actually that sort of gets us into this sort of challenge question. And there are a bunch of issues with data monetization and with AI in particular, risks and obstacles to success. And I wonder if we could take a look at some of those that you think are most salient. Barb, let's start with you. Where do you see as some of the biggest risks that companies and investors need to be thinking about here?
Well, I think you have to be aware that there are 6 capabilities that you have to have in place. And these are 6 abilities in an organization. So kind of like having cooking skills in people. I look across
boiling, sauteing, frying. Right?
I look at you, and I can't tell just from looking at you all what your cooking skills are. I'd have to see you and how you practice it, right? I want to see who's scrambling an egg and who can make a souffle, right? It's the same thing with organizations where you have to have, in the case of data and AI, actually 6 sets of skills as an organization. For instance, you have to be able to establish those data assets that people can find, use, and trust. You need a data platform that can cost effectively serve up the assets in and out of the firm. You need data science. You need an understanding of customers. You need acceptable data use, which is data governance plus ethics and values. And then you need trust building in AI, which is AI explanation. That's a lot of stuff you have to have, right? And all of it is, again, built through practices and then organizational learning. So a couple points based on that. If I'm a PE organization, the first thing I'd want to feel great about is that you can evaluate the level of capabilities. So you can look in either portfolio companies or yourself, and you can, by looking at the practices in place, know exactly how advanced you are.
So I want to get a quick diagnostic GPA across those 6 capabilities for every company I am thinking of investing in or I have invested in.
Exactly right. And that's actually really straightforward to do. In fact, we talk about it in the book. So that's the first, is kind of, where are you? The other thing is, you look around, and when you have an advanced level in place somewhere, again, either within the portfolio, in a partner, or in yourself, then, because it's all about learning, that can accelerate where you want to be across all the other
so I find my A students, and I have my A students teach my B and C students.
There you go.
In the company or across the portfolio, right?
There you go. So in a lot of big companies, it would be the same thing across a portfolio, is elevate those advanced capabilities, and then you use those to really expedite and get yourself ahead. And so knowing what you need to have in place and what level you have to in place. And if you're not where you need to be, then there are strategies. For instance, scoping down. So, okay, if you don't have the level of capability, then that's where you have to let's just take this one area and let's build that up, and let's really be great at it across our portfolio. And then we can start over time learning and growing, getting better.
Hoi-Young, talk a little bit. You've seen these obstacles roll out as an operator, as well, as well as an advisor. How have you? What do you see as some of the biggest obstacles in technical change management, other obstacles?
Yeah, so I think the three major obstacles that we see on a pretty consistent basis is around use case selection, model building and deployment, and then finally the change management that kind of we talked about a little bit. So I could kind of cover each of those. So with use case, oftentimes what we see in terms of errors is, well, two types of errors. One type of error are these really cool use cases that have very little business impact, right? And you can't blame the data scientists for coming up
All
with really
sizzle, no steak.
cool, yeah. And so that's one. And then the other type are cases where you really don't need to use AI, right? So I'll give you one simple example. Think about customer lifetime value versus customer profitability. One, you want to use machine learning or AI. The other, you don't have to. So customer lifetime value, because it's a prediction of the future, machine learning is extremely helpful, right? Because again, it's a prediction machine, right? But customer profitability is more of a snapshot of what is the profitability today, as well as historically. And in those cases, you don't really have to use AI or machine learning, right? So it's really understanding for which use cases should I apply machine learning versus just traditional good old-fashioned analytics. So that's on the use case piece. On the model component, there's a lot of focus around model building. So I think most companies do a fairly good job, especially if they have good data scientists building the model. Where they trip up is in the model deployment. Because model building by itself is kind of like potential value creation, but it's not realized value creation until you embed it into your workflow, get the system into your tech stack, right? And that takes data engineering skills, different set of skills. So that's another place where we see companies trip up. And then the third one is change management. And Tom, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, where you're like, what if the salesperson is, sales leader is really into it, and then the marketing leader is not really into it? To get to the use case, you need, as we talked about, the strategic focus, but also executive buy-in. You actually need executives to make the decision on the use case, because if they're not bought in early and often throughout the process, they will kill any initiative, right? In particular, ML initiatives, because there's still a certain level of like uncertainty and fear associated with these models, because as Barb mentioned, there's this unexplainability factor, this big black box factor. And so the change management piece, our guidance is make sure that leaders are involved in selecting the use case, because when you buy into selecting that use case, oftentimes you're going to make sure that when it comes time to roll it out, you'll be involved in the change management aspect of it. So,
and one of the
Can I
and I
add
want
one
to
more
pick up
thing,
on
too?
okay, Barb, but we're sort of running out of time, so let's start moving to
This will be
wrapping
quick.
up. So this will be good.
quick,
Yeah.
because another reason why management and top level is needed. First, I completely agree that they're required for the action part for change management. But for value creation and realization, they're also needed to make sure that there's accountability for the realization of the money, because a lot of the change in work basically creates slack. So we become more productive. We have organizational slack that's created. But if we don't reallocate that slack so that we're hitting the bottom line, basically we just become more productive
Slackers. It's my life's ambition,
and we don't realize the money, right? So that's another really important thing, because we see that miss a lot in organizations.
Which is where I like Ho-Young's point. We need management buy-in early and often.
Right.
It's not like, this is great, you guys go do it, come back to me in 6 months. We really need to be hands-on. As Jason, as we're coming to wrap, let me sort of think about this. Can we start moving? What I want to do is sort of a quick lightning rod of something to do tomorrow. Something that you think companies should be doing right now. And Jason, perhaps you can pick up where you're going and take it to there. Then we'll go quickly around the horn and finish this up, because this discussion, as we've discovered, could go on a lot more, and we'd be just getting to the tip of the iceberg of the opportunities. So, Jason.
Absolutely. It's interesting when you look at immediate next steps that a company could take when they're thinking about this. This does tie back into some of the pitfalls, and I'll bring that forward, which is one area that we're seeing a lot of challenge is understanding which vendor to use. There's just been this rapid proliferation of AI boutique firms. It's like the .com era, right? And so you have a wide range of capabilities and value propositions. So before you really make any selections on that, you want to be very judicious. And I really like Barbara's point in understanding, what exactly kind of value can derive, and then staying on it with a centralized transformation management office as you implement going forward, making sure that those efficiencies are banked. In other words, you're realizing tangible impact as you drive accountability, visibility, and performance. But tactically speaking, let's say next week, what could a company do if, after this discussion, what would leaders do? I think, in a sense, an honest assessment of the data and digital maturity of the operation is first and foremost. In other words, there are varying degrees of visibility across the functions and geos. There may be inconsistent accountability between BPOs, your outsourcing operations, and offshore operation, onshore operation. There may be, maybe a question you need to ask yourself. It's 4 p.m. Do you know where your sales rep is? Do you have visibility in what your salespeople are doing?
Which bar, basically, if I'm right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And are you making decisions based on anecdotes? So, in other words, look, the customer is never going to accept this price. Or are you using good dynamic pricing models that are informed by empirical data and providing you really good insights and the credibility to push back on that person and say, actually, no, we're going to take the price up or offer a different type of pricing model. So I'd say tactically, do an honest assessment and understand that crawl, walk, run, or progress over perfection is absolutely fine. The initial step doesn't have to be out of the box silver bullet AI. It can be very basic digital enhancements to really drive leading indicators, better visibility into performance, make better decisions, then invest wisely into the right use cases, the right applications for AI in a very tactical way to drive measurable results. I would say if you follow that kind of a pattern in let's say the next week and then the next 90 days, you will make tremendous progress in making meaningful change. And then beyond what you're thinking, the change management, structural changes, that's down the road. I'm thinking in the first 90 days, really driving real progress. That would be my recommendation.
Hoyoung, first steps.
Yeah, so PE firms are uniquely positioned to help their portcos, right? Many of them have couple of dozen portcos. And so portcos are clamoring for help in terms of where to leverage machine learning, generative AI. I realize there's a fine line, right? PE firms have to cross in terms of like how much they support versus kind of getting the pull from the portcos. But when you think about machine learning or generative AI, there are use cases. So for some of which we talked about, like the customer lifetime value, personalization, pricing, as well as generative AI use cases, like leveraging Copilot to help you with software development, or customer service chatbots that are much more sophisticated than they used to be, and really kind of mapping out for each of their portcos which of the use cases would apply, and then providing guidance and support. I think in that way, PE firms can create a lot of value in a short time period with some of these really advanced capabilities that are out there.
So sitting as the kibitzer to a group of portcos who may not have a lot of experience, but bringing experienced kibitzers to say, here's how we can, that group of people we brought in, each with 10 projects, right? We'll say, let's help do the evaluation and let's help pick and choose what's going to matter the most. Barb.
Absolutely.
So I love both of those. We're going to really understand our capability and invest in that. We're really going to understand our initiatives and be purposeful in what we invest in. I would add that we want to set ourselves up to be learning organizations. This is all about learning and growing and becoming better as we act. So what we don't want to do as a PE firm is always reinvent the wheel, always start from scratch. We want to understand that we're going to establish kind of foundations and then grow and become really proficient at doing this. And so one thing you can do right away is take one initiative, trace it from data to insight to action to value creation to value realization. How are you doing at each of those steps? How much transparency do you have into those steps? See what you know and build on that.
This has been awesome. And let me try to close with with random shots of data, right? Let's start with this. Let's start with, we surveyed some private company executives and asked them what they're thinking about in terms about AI in their portfolio companies. 62% of the PE executives says that they were focused on driving their portcos to become more efficient. 32% said they were urging them to use technology, AI, to grow the business. So 60% in efficiency, 30% in growth. 25% say they were using it to improve their own firm's operation, and 18% said they were using it specifically in due diligence that we talked about. Now, what's interesting, Barb, that maps to you said 50% of value creation can come from efficiency. And guess what? They're doing a good job. They're focusing 50% there. You also said, but so that seems like a good set of priorities. That second question, improving the firm's operation and due diligence, is interesting because it gets to that question about who's controlling this? What's the role of PE versus the portco? Where do I invest? Where do I make you invest? How do I manage that most effectively? I think that's really interesting because at the end of that process, and let me go back to where we began, Barb, at the end of that process is 10% more revenue. And if I am a private equity firm, or if I'm a portco with my private equity firm on my back, that 10% is a really, really attractive opportunity. And so with that, Barb Wixom, Ho-Young Pak, Jason McDonald, thank you so much for your conversations here. As I said before, this recording will be available so you can look at it again, get more insight from it. We're all happy to hear from you, and we hope that we hope to hear from you. And thank you very much for listening. Barb, Ho-Young, Jason, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. A lot of fun.
Take care.